All right, so good evening. Today, in your video notes, on the top, you're going to write down the essential question, and it is how can or I can trace the flow of energy through living systems, and that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So just review, you don't need to write anything down yet, but just review from the web quest as you learn about what a food chain is. And you learn that it's a series of steps in one line, basically, or essentially, where you're transferring the energy by eating and then being eaten. And so the energy from each organism is moving through the chain, the food chain. And so there was the level of each organism as you move up the food chain has a certain name. So at the very bottom, the first always ever organism is called the primary producer. And then what eats primary producers is now called the primary consumer. And then what eats the primary consumer would be called the secondary consumer. Then you have the tertiary consumer, and then sometimes the quaternary consumer. And so these is what we call each organism as you move up each level of the food chain. Now, we also know that there are food webs, and basically they're interconnecting, and they're kind of more of a hot mess situation, but there are chains embedded in food webs. So you can find one food chain, but then as a food web completely in an ecosystem, you can see how they interact. All right, so now we're going to begin taking notes on page 7. So as we move up in the food chain, we call each step of the food chain, each organism in the food chain or food web, we call it a trophic level. So primary producers are always the first trophic level. They're already always the number one first organism. And so when we look at trophic levels, we also look at something called ecological pyramids. And so ecological pyramids help show relative amounts of energy or matter or numbers that are in each trophic level. And so there are 3 types, and we're going to go through each one. But there's the pyramid of energy, the pyramid of biomass, or organic matter tissue, and we're going to say that's in grams, and then the pyramid of numbers. So let's talk about the pyramid of energy first. So organisms need energy to grow. They need energy so they can breathe. They need energy so they can move. They need energy to grow, and they need energy to be able to reproduce. So organisms use a lot of the energy they got from the previous trophic level to do those things. So a bunny is going to use the energy it got from the carrots it's eating to do those kinds of things. However, the remaining energy is lost as heat. It is a byproduct of doing all those activities. So breathing and moving and growing and metabolizing, you're going to release heat as a byproduct of doing all those activities. So on average, about 10% of the energy is actually able to move up to the next trophic level. So only 10% of that carrot's energy actually goes to the bunny. And so that's what this pyramid is showing right here, showing you how 100% of the energy was in the primary producers, but as you move up to the bunny and then to the bird, you lose energy. Only 10% goes to the next level. Most of it's either used by the organism or the rest is released as heat into the atmosphere. So it's either heat or used, and then only 10% actually moves up to the next trophic level. So that's the pyramid of energy. The pyramid of biomass is literally looking at the total living tissue in each level. So how much grams of tissue are in these primary producers, and then how many tissue is in the next trophic level, the primary consumers. The greatest biomass, the amount of greatest mass is at the base of the pyramid. It's always in the primary producers. There has to be more primary producers at the bottom in order to sustain the rest of the chain going up. Now, the pyramid of numbers is at the end, and the pyramid of numbers is essentially literally numbers. It's literally counting the number of individual organisms in each trophic level, in each food chain going up. So again, you have the pyramid of energy, showing how energy is used going in the organism and going through each trophic level and how heat is being lost. We have biomass. It's looking at how much literally living tissue in grams there is in each trophic level. And then pyramid of numbers is literally how many amount of each individual organism is in that food chain. So I want you to go to the video notes forum and I want you to answer these two questions. What is the difference between a food chain and a food web? Let's review from our web quest. And then which level of consumer is the mouse in this food chain? So what is the name of this trophic level in this mouse? Is it a primary consumer, a primary producer, a tertiary consumer? What is it? What do you think? All right, so answer those on your video forum on my webpage, and I will be looking at these notes when we come back tomorrow.